Perhaps after watching too many superhero movies and wanting to spice up their life, people like to imagine that they have all sorts of powers. Whether it's a 9-to-5 commuter who thinks they are far better than most drivers who have ever lived, a person who thinks they have superpowers because they are good at drinking or something similar, they all have the same issue in common, that they either have inflated a commonly required skill they and others have to use every day into something special, or they think they have a skill that simply doesn't even exist. In the video today, 10 examples. Number 10. People who think they see auras probably have synesthesia. Some people think they see visible auras around other people and claim that it tells them how good that person is. However, Dr. Jamie Ward is not convinced. She had a patient who had synesthesia and would see entire colors spread across her field of vision when hearing the names of her loved ones, and when she saw them in person, she would see visible auras of varying colors. Dr. Ward believes that this could be a clue to what is going on with people who claim to be able to see auras in other people. Dr. Ward believes that it's likely some form of synesthesia, where the person strongly associates colors with people and creates the illusion in their brain that there is a color surrounding the entire person. There is no evidence that there is any kind of energy field around someone that could make an independent aura, so this theory makes a lot of sense. Someone with synesthesia would be likely to associate colors very strongly with different people and may even see a visible effect, using their subconscious to decide the color based on how they judge that person. Number 9. Being super good at multitasking isn't even a thing. People love to brag about multitasking, but the truth is, it isn't even real. You actually cannot do two things at the same time, as your brain is simply not capable of doing two tasks at once. When you think you're multitasking, you're actually rapidly switching between the two tasks as your brain tries to juggle all of the extra and unnecessary sensory input that you're throwing at it. What this means is that your brain is now basically being overloaded, kind of like you have too many programs running and you're using too much RAM. Your brain is just going to get bogged down and you're actually going to be far slower at getting anything done. You simply won't be the efficient maestro that you think you are, and you are actually more likely to make mistakes while multitasking than when you're not. It may initially sound efficient, but if you have to correct mistakes later or redo shoddy work, you probably realize that it wasn't worth it. Number 8. The ability to tell when random people you don't know are lying to you. This is a classic power that many, especially in law enforcement, think they have. However, studies have shown most people aren't better than 50% when it comes to guessing based on judgment alone. For those who really think they can do this subconsciously, they should be careful to make snap judgments. You don't have a superpower, it's just your brain making judgments based on the context and information that it has on hand, but there are a lot of things missing and you could be mistaken and cause unnecessary strife. Now, you may potentially be quite good at sussing out lies from a close friend or a family member, but that is a very different situation. Those people are people you know very well, and they may have tells that they don't even realize you can exploit. Even in these cases, though, you should still be careful not to read too much into your own ability to detect lies, because you might still be wrong. The truth is, most experts who are actually good at catching people in lies are simply using the technique of listening carefully and looking for inconsistencies in your story. Number 7. Picking up the energy and the vibes of people around you. Some people like to claim, sort of similar to the aura power, that they can feel people's energies around them. Some say this stresses them out in a crowd, and some have even claimed to be energy vampires who feed by going out into crowds and enjoying that delicious crowd energy and the vibes that it supplies. A lot of people who think this like to feel they have a special power that others do not. The more boring truth is that, similar to people's belief in auras, people who believe they can feel people's energies are just making judgments in their head about the people around them and the state of the crowd, and then internalizing that as positive or negative feelings. There is no special energy to pick up, but from birth, humans learn to read people's faces and body language naturally. If you're worried about someone's negative energy, it's likely just your brain warning you about something that seems a little bit off about their behavior. Number 6. Being a really great driver who is much better than all the other horrible drivers. One of the most commonly acknowledged facts in the United States of America especially is that most drivers think all other drivers are mostly pretty terrible, but think that they themselves are well above average. While most people chuckle at this fact, they still go away thinking that they are one of the people who is truly above average, and don't realize that the joke is absolutely on them as they chuckle about all the other bad drivers. The obvious issue with this national American delusion is that by the very laws of statistics, there will always be an average, and most people are going to sit pretty close to it, more or less. This means that unless you have driven professionally for many years, odds are you're not specifically above the average of anyone. This is especially true if you're young and have very little experience driving and have little to no experience driving professionally. The fact of the matter is that most of the time you think someone is a much worse driver than you, they probably made a mistake that you've made before or were simply unfamiliar with the area. More often than not, your belief that everyone is far below you on the driving skill totem is very mistaken. Number 5. Being able to discern news and political news far better than anyone else. America has a problem today where many truly cannot tell the difference between real and fake news. Part of the problem is the independent mindset of Americans, many of whom stubbornly believe that hearing about something and having an opinion suddenly makes them an expert and that they don't need to listen to or consult actual experts about a subject. Many Americans are simply uninterested in what an expert take on most things is anymore. They would prefer to hear from someone who seems more like a regular Joe saying something that sounds an awful lot like their own point of view, so they don't have to challenge their view whatsoever. However, people should keep in mind that just because you listen to news or politics regularly doesn't mean you understand all of the subtleties of the subjects being discussed. We aren't saying you should simply listen to one expert and take their word for granted, but reading up on several expert opinions and then reading more background on the subject to better inform yourself will do more good than you can even imagine. The various experts out there that you can listen to, they're not just simply watching more political news from you. They often have a degree in a field called political science, which makes them an expert and helps them pass complicated political ongoings that would confuse many of us. Number 4. An amazing sense of direction that beats everyone else's. This is another situation where a common skill that everyone must use is misinterpreted by some people as something special they can do far better than others. While reading a map in this day and age, or really being able to know your cardinal directions almost instantly would certainly be good skills to have, most direction know-it-alls don't even have those skills, they just think they have some sort of innate compass. However, humans don't really have the special kind of directional sense that some animals do, and we rely on our brains to read maps or follow patterns that we previously knew. If the person who claims to be great at directions does not know the place he is leading you through, he is unlikely to be better. To make matters worse for those who think they are directional experts, nearly everyone is using a GPS, at least for backup to some extent these days, and GPS has been proven to weaken your directional and navigational skills over time. If someone is truly better at direction, it is likely mostly learned as they have figured out patterns that will help them find their way in any situation, perhaps even at a young age. Number 3. The ability to become an instant expert at anything with a simple Google search. One of the most infuriating aspects of the internet age is how so many people now think they have this ability to use Google foo and suddenly be a master of anything. These people don't even take the time to do a very little amount of work on the subject that they're looking into, but they're now convinced that they have the answer. Once they have the answer, they don't listen to any competing information and are incapable of learning further about the subject. What people are forgetting is that if you really want to know, you need to understand, and this requires more time reading expert opinions, reading up on background information, and poring over research studies and things like that. There will often be competing sources on anything, and you may even see multiple experts with different opinions. Humans, they like to make judgments, and they like to resolve things. The brain simply finds that satisfying, but it isn't really good for us overall. Sometimes the best decision is actually not to form a strong opinion that you wouldn't feel weird about changing later. This leaves your mind open to many different possibilities. Number 2. People who think they don't get hungover at all might want to lay off the booze. A claim you will hear from young people in college, sometimes young people in high school, and older people who have a serious problem with booze is that they can drink and drink and drink and they just don't get hungover. Now, there are some people who actually have extra functioning kidneys that they were born with, and those people can actually metabolize alcohol to an extra degree, but this is seriously rare. Most people who are making the claim are simply mistaken about the damage they're doing to their bodies. The truth is that if you're drinking a lot over a short period of time, you are doing temporary damage to your body that it now has to repair. You have toxins that your body has to remove by working them through your natural waste system over time. If you've been drinking heavily and you don't feel anything in the morning, it doesn't mean you aren't hungover, but that you have a drinking problem, you've built up a tolerance, and you are used to the ill effects enough that they've just become normal for you. There are many organizations that can help people with alcoholism, and you're not alone. There are always people who would be happy to share strategies online or in person, and it's never too late to stop drinking. The truth is that if you drink heavily on a regular basis and truly feel you aren't getting hangovers, you have become far too accustomed to the constant stream of booze in your bloodstream, and you need to give your poor liver and your poor kidneys a bit of a break. Number 1. The people who think they are the whisperer of all animals are just good with theirs. A huge amount of people worldwide love animals. Cultures have been keeping cats and dogs since about as far back as we can record history, and we have reason to believe that they have been domesticating them for far longer. Even people who don't own pets still find them to be adorable, and you can't go anywhere on Facebook without seeing some adorable cat pictures or the like, usually upvoted mindlessly by everyone who comes across them. Seeing as many people own a pet, it may not be surprising that most people seem to think they are an expert not just with their pet and not just with their type of pet, but with every type of animal imaginable. These are the people who see a dog and a cat and instead of just enjoying its presence and petting it, have to go on to anyone in listening range about how great they are with animals. These people will often make thoroughly obnoxious displays where they make all kinds of weird sounds or other movements that they somehow think are going to make the animal come straight for them. These people forget that their own pet responds to these things because they are trained to do it at a young age. While there are real animal behavioral experts out there, unless that's your career, you're probably not suddenly a beast master of taming your neighbor's cat. And quite honestly, just owning a pet doesn't even necessarily make you an expert at taking care of that specific one creature that you actually own. Taking care of animals is hard work, and doing it right, it takes a lot of practice and plenty of trial and error. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below and don't forget to subscribe. Brand new videos just like this, 7 days a week. And as always, thank you for watching.